Hello, Geoff.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I am again never better this week.
Well, you're on a roll. You're on fire, man. I don't know
Fully
what's keeping you going.
caffeinated. I'm totally seized with enthusiasm for this episode today. Um, Later on in the strategy suite, it's going to be action packed there. We're going to be joined by our old friend, the leader of the non-NDP party of British Columbia, Jess Ketchum, and we're going to discuss deficits are rising, not falling in Alberta.
hmm
If a bill falls at first reading, does anybody hear? If an agreement is signed between the federal government and the Musqueam, did anyone at the province hear?
or neighboring First Nations.
And how many BC Conservative candidates will we hear from? And hey, Geoff, have you heard what time it is?
Yeah,
So we have
it's
lots to
exactly the
talk
right
about.
time for BC.
It's maybe daylight savings time, maybe standard time, but it's also time to distract the public. B- But first, our guest today, featured guest, is Ray Castelli. Ray Castelli is from Prince Rupert, and that should be enough to get on this show. He's a rainmaker, but there's more. He was a rare species known as a progressive conservative, active in the 1980s through an exciting time in Canadian politics, ultimately serving a number of roles, including Chief of Staff to BC ministers like Tom Siddon and Chief of Staff to the Defence Minister Kim Campbell, and later her Deputy Chief of Staff when she rose to become the first female Prime Minister in Canadian history. Post politics, Ray has worked in the mining sector, renewable energy, and defense industries, and since 2008 has been CEO of Burnaby-based Weatherhaven, a world leader as a designer, manufacturer, and installer of portable shelters, camps, and field hospitals. Weatherhaven products reach around the world in military and crisis response settings. Very interesting company. Ray has lent his expertise to federal and provincial governments on how Canada can support manufacturing and be more successful in defense procurement. He's part of the effort to attract the international headquarters of the Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank to Vancouver. Ray, I hope I didn't miss anything there that too important, but welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
That's pretty good. And I recall watching your session with Bridget Anderson where you learned about the DSRB for the first time. So that
Yeah,
was
no, we learn a lot
interesting.
on this show from our
Yeah, we
guests, let me tell
want to
you.
hear more about it too today.
Well, tell
Happy,
us a bit
happy.
about Weatherhaven first. It's Geoff, you were reading up on it too. It's a pretty great example of a BC company plugging into a big world out there.
Yeah, it's a really cool company. It started in BC. It started in Vancouver, originally by a couple guys who were in the ecotourism business, and they would do some mobile camps for people that were going to um, either Antarctica or Greenland or to climb a mountain somewhere. And I think Greenpeace is one of their first customers, and then
Interesting.
uh, they ended up doing a mining project in NWT for the first diamond mining. And while they were up there, the Canadian Canadian Army saw their shelters and inquired, and so they started supplying the Canadian military. The Canadian military took them overseas to peacekeeping operations. Other countries saw the Canadian kit. They developed some additional kit for Canada and got into R&D and got some global patents. And then as it started to be seen by other countries in these UN peacekeeping, they started doing work for the UN and for dozens of other UN country militaries. And so now, many years later, we've basically been deployed to 96 countries around the world. We've supplied about 39 militaries, but our main focus is on three areas. One is supplying the deployable infrastructure to support the military. Our biggest customers being Canada, the U.S., and NATO. Secondly, in the mining sector, we do a lot of mining exploration camps, remote, and particularly that weather protection in very cold or very
Mm.
hot climates. That's where the Weatherhaven name comes from. And then the third is in the portable hospitals. And we've done dozens and dozens of mobile hospitals around the world for a variety of clients.
You were
So
pretty
yes,
involved in the Haiti crisis in
we
the
were.
past. Yeah.
Yeah. Our field hospital was the very first hospital in to Haiti, and then we were able to supply the UN with some additional hospital capability. So we're very much about quick response, something that's deployable, and then once it's used, it can be redeployed or recycled. And so a company or a country will buy our kit, or buy a camp, or buy a modular system, and they'll be able to use it, pack it up, move it back, clean it up, use it again, over and over again. We have customers who've been using the same kit for 30 years. So it's good value for good value for money. And Canada's been tremendous for us as a calling card internationally because we're so well respected. And I think Canada also has a kind of a unique position in the global military space for two things. One is the fact that we are well known for shelter solutions because of the vast space of the Arctic that we have to cover. And so that's why you've seen companies like ATCO and Britco and Weatherhaven and others kind of come out of Canada. And then secondly, because of our up and down defense spending over the years, Canada has become very, very good at what they call repair and overhaul or in-service support. It's a key capability in Canada because we've been able to keep our planes in the air longer than any other country. Our vehicles last longer. So our Canadian military has become very astute at how to extend the life of assets by properly maintaining them. And shelters is just another example of that.
Well, Ray, what I was interested about when I went and looked at the website is that it underlined, I think, a reality for me, which is when we discuss defense spending, the tendency is to talk about super expensive, very sophisticated
Yeah.
technology like a submarine or a fighter jet. But an enormous amount of the market has a huge sort of, I would say, civil defense thing. Your shelters could be a military hospital, or it could be Doctors Without Borders in an earthquake zone, and likewise in aviation and in so many areas. What the military needs, the civil society will need in some circumstances as well. So it could have a very important impact in terms of expanding business opportunities for people who at the moment have nothing to do with the military sector and maybe won't in the future, but
It's
are helping out in so many circumstances.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's actually called dual use technologies for the military. It really arose out of necessity in Canada because the Canadian market was too small as a defense sector to simply rely on defense spending. And of course,
Mhm.
as I said, it was up and down, and so you really couldn't plan long-term defense spending. And so you had to have other industries that you could apply it to. So what we tend to do is we tend to do a lot of our R&D and our developing the kind of military spec equipment for the military because they have the most difficult circumstances, the most robust conditions. It's got to work every time, kind of thing. And then we kind of reverse engineer it down to something a little bit more economical that we'll use for commercial applications, and that might be for a mining camp because they don't need the same level of spec. And we do a lot of work, for example, in Antarctica, where 24 of the 32 countries that maintain climate science installations in Antarctica use our kit.
Mhm.
So there's many dual use, and you're going to see the term dual use used a lot with this new defense strategy because Canada is a perfect example where a tech company or somebody that's in cybersecurity might be able to do one thing for the commercial market, but they might have a special application that can help in defense. What became a necessity has now become a feature of defense strategy.
Yes, sovereignty is one of those words that sounds impressive in a press release. But if it doesn't have meaning behind it, it's just talk. And talk doesn't create jobs or grow investment here in BC or in Canada. Last week, we spoke about the Government of Canada's Buy Canadian policy and BC's Look West strategy, and why Presenting Sponsored House is advocating for tiered classifications of what it means to be Canadian and sovereign. A tiered system would ensure that while companies with operations in Canada are rewarded, truly Canadian businesses with operations and ownership here are given preference. Because here's the thing. For infrastructure to be sovereign, operation and control need to remain within Canada. That's exactly what TELUS has done with their sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, Quebec, and they are looking west for their future scale-up. They build factories where operations and data are completely controlled within Canadian borders. TELUS has been walking the talk. We need to ensure the government's Buy Canadian policy rewards businesses that do the same. In these times of global uncertainty and shifting trade relationships, Canada needs to support its own industries, not just to strengthen our economy, but to ensure that we can deliver the services Canadians and British Columbians need without being vulnerable to foreign control or external pressure. That's sovereignty with meaning behind it, clear definitions that turn good intentions into real outcomes.
Well, Ray, you're a great local expert on defense spending, and in this moment of time in Canada, we've hardly cracked 2% spending on defense as a percentage of GDP in a long time, and now Prime Minister Carney has set a target of 5%, which is, obviously no one saw that coming a few years ago.
No.
How big a deal is this? Like, I mean, it seems like a big deal, but how are you processing that? How can you put that in perspective for our listeners?
It's a massive deal, and I think people really have to uh, appreciate just what an important strategic decision this is for Canada. I think given the risk that's up there and with all the trade uncertainty, given the concern about sovereignty, given the Arctic becoming more important strategically, I think over the years Canada's kind of bounced around that 1%, 1.5% of spending, which is basically what that means in numbers. Is Canada spent around 20 to 30 million a year. By going to 2%, it's going to bump up into kind of the 40 to 50 million range.
40, 50 billion, you mean?
Billions,
Billion, yeah.
as GDP grows. And if it does go to 5% over the next 10 years, and GDP continues to grow, it could be in the $100 billion plus. I should note though that 5% target is not just defense.
Mm-hmm.
I think defense was planning to be about 3 to 3.5% of that, and that the rest is related to security. So
Mm-hmm.
you could include things like Coast Guard patrols and security policing, all under one rubric of what NATO would consider to be applicable spending for security and defense.
But still, it's obviously a major step change. Yeah.
It's huge. It's going to be huge for the economy, and the important thing about defense spending, if you think back around the world, where have a lot of innovations in technology and developments in our economy come from? In many cases, even things like the internet have come about as a result of defense spending, and defense jobs tend to be pretty high tech. It tends to be advanced manufacturing. It tends to have a good export market, as we've proven by being able to. We have products that we developed for Canada where we sold 200 to Canada, and we ended up selling 5,000 around the world. So it has a good export applicability. So it's the kind of spending that you will see dividends from in terms of jobs and investment and development and investment research and development of patents and so on. So I think it's a major step forward for the country, not only in terms of being able to grow the economy, but also just in terms of our sovereignty and being able to basically protect our own shores, being one of the biggest countries in the world, and being in the middle of all these geopolitical powers between the U.S. and Europe and China and Russia, and so being able to look after ourselves. I think Prime Minister Carney's done the country a great service.
But this sovereignty argument is the one that I get hung up on because I totally support it. But it implies, for example, that even at the level of a boot for buying boots for people in your defense forces or civil defense, you're not going to be stuck at the end of 3 or 4 months of difficulties trying to order from overseas. You want to develop the local capacity to build that, and that's the whole upside. But under trade rules historically, procurement has been wide open to the American firms, and it's
Yeah.
also illegal under trade rules to say, well, you're pretty good, but we think our Burnaby people are equal, so we're going to buy in Burnaby. Even that kind of a judgment call can be risky for a municipality. Can you just tell me how the trade stuff would work? How are we going to be able to boost Canadian business and build that domestic and sovereign capacity in the face of some of the trade barriers we've had, or not barriers, but trade rules?
Well, we've had a lot of experience with this, trying to sell into 30, 40, 50 countries around the world. Um, they tend to favor their local industries. Canada was probably one of the most open in terms of almost inviting competition to come here. And we found that quite frustrating. And we argued for changes to the procurement rules to at least have more recognition that investments in Canada and building the Canadian Defence Force had some domestic benefits. And we saw some gradual changes over the years. There was a procurement reform that came out about 12 years ago, and now this defense policy. So I think the logic of it, Geoff, is that you you have there is a domestic benefit to having spending in Canada, but you can't do everything. So there are certain things you're going to have to buy from outside. We're probably never going to make tanks, for example. We're not that big.
Submarines.
Or submarines is another good example. Fighter jets is another example. But there are some things that we can do very well domestically and actually be net exporters around the world. Secondly, and this is a really important point, is that security and defense spending tends to be exempted from like trade
Oh, I see.
rules.
Okay.
So under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, things that you wouldn't be able to favor, for example, automobile vehicles or other kinds of products, in the area of defense and security, countries are able to exempt and favor their products, which is why there's not only tariff barriers, but there's many, many non-tariff barriers. And the U.S. is probably the biggest example of that, where there's numerous of those. And so I think Canada is just basically leveling the playing field. And we've argued for a long time that it's very unfair to have this unlevel playing field where every time we go around the world to try to export, we're having to face all these restrictions. Yet Canada was wide open, anybody could come. And so all we're really doing here is essentially kind of balancing it. And the benefit of that is going to be by being able to build your own internal supply chains for some of those things you specialize in. And I think what was recognized in the strategy, which I thought was very clever, is that we can't do everything. Like if you imagine there's 100 different capabilities that are key to maintaining a military presence. Canada's identified about 12 to 14 that they call key industrial capabilities. And these are things that Canada's particularly good at.
We should
Things
do
like
those things. Yeah.
commercial space defense with people like McDonnell Detweiler. Some of the shipbuilding things for Arctic ice breaking, we can be the best in the world at. Certainly, Weatherhaven would argue we're the best in the world at deployable infrastructure, and that's provable. So we have a number of these key industrial capabilities in Canada that we both need to maintain internally so that if there is some sort of conflict internationally, it's going to be every man for themselves, right? So they're going to look after their own needs first, and then they'll worry about if there's anything left over to send to somebody else. So some of those key things like weapons and bullets and ammunition and whether it's pharmaceuticals or some of the cyber computer stuff, you need to be able to sustain enough of an industry domestically, and that means sustained funding. And the problem that we've always had as an industry is that we've had ups and downs, and both level, successive governments have had this problem. So it's not a partisan thing. You've had this up and down spending where some years there's a lot of spending, some years there's not. So it's hard for somebody in the industry to plan or to invest and to try to build that domestic capability. And so by bringing forth a defense industrial strategy that says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fund these key areas, and we're going to have predictable long-term commitment to this funding. And we're going to try to be the best in the world at what we can be the best in the world at. And that'll also enable us to do things like what Prime Minister Carney did with Europe, where he went over to Europe and they have their own program for developing technology called SAFE. And we're able to then do some trade between them and say, we can be part of that program. And in turn, there's some other partnership. And so what they've essentially boiled down the strategy down to is three kind of key words. If we can build it here, if we have the capability, if we need it to be here, if we need to be able to rely on it, we can build it here. If it's something we can't build here, then we can partner with someone like Europe, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't find anybody to partner with, then we'll go and buy it from another country. And I think that's a very sensible approach.
So what's BC's angle here, do you think it should be? I know Minister Ravi Kahlon's, as jobs minister, is kind of focusing on the opportunity for defense spending and how it can leverage opportunities in BC. But we don't have a huge sector. We've got a bit of aerospace. We've got your company. We've got shipbuilding. What do you see as the potential?
I think there's a lot of potential in British Columbia because, again, go back to that term, dual use. BC is a center for technology development and software development. There's a lot of innovative technologies that have been developed in British Columbia. For example, I mentioned commercial space defense. That started here in British Columbia with McDonnell Douglas. That was the first company in the world to start developing commercial space defense. You've got companies like D-Wave, that was the first company in the world to start developing commercial quantum technology. You've got companies like General Fusion, that was the first in the world to start to trying to develop an actual fusion generator. And there's numerous examples. So there's a real technology innovative entity here in British Columbia. This history of it, and we've also got pretty close proximity with to Boeing and so a pretty good sized aerospace market. So there's definitely areas for British Columbia where we can to build on, but it's going to take some commitment, I think, from the provincial government to help. First of all, educate companies, make them aware that this is the defense sector. Here are the kinds of opportunities that there are. There's also things called, there's industrial technology benefits that a lot of the bigger companies that do sell products from outside the country, they have obligations that they got to do a certain amount of that work in Canada. And BC's got to work to try to attract some of that work here to British Columbia rather than have it only be in Ontario and Quebec. And I've met with Minister Kahlon a couple times, and I'm very impressed. He's very committed to trying to find ways to attract investment, identify who are some of the key companies that are in the defense sector and what kind of support they can provide, for example, in trade promotion. And as well, I think there's probably dozens and dozens of companies in British Columbia that could be players in the defense sector but don't realize it yet. And so matching that together to say, here's the kind of technologies that all these other defense partners are looking for. We have some of those technologies here. We've got to educate these people, introduce them, and make the connection. So I think that's part of what Bridget Anderson's trying to do with the Board of Trade Initiative as well. So I'm happy that there's a recognition. And I think that's another part of why people like Tamara Vrooman and Peter Armstrong were working hard with Bridget and with Minister Kahlon to try to attract this defense security bank to British Columbia, because BC does sit in a kind of a unique location globally between the Arctic.
What is this defense bank? Anyways, we've heard about it in the news, but it's like it kind of came up out of the blue about a month ago. So
the best way to think about it is what Europe is trying to do is they're trying to find a way to provide more predictable funding and financial support to supply chains to make them more resilient and more responsive. And again, when you have a situation where you've had kind of up and down defense spending over the years, it's hard to sometimes get funding to support programs. I think what they want to be able to do is be able to link together pools of basically be able to raise pools of capital, match that to supply chains that need investment in order to more rapidly respond to needs, in order to have a more sustainable and resilient supply chain. And we're kind of sitting here in British Columbia in a unique position because we have 65% of the supply chain for most of the Western world's domestic defense production actually comes from like Asia, Southeast Asia. And a lot of this funding is going to come from Europe. And the Arctic is kind of the meeting point for a lot of the strategic activity. And if you look at a map at the globe, and you look at where Vancouver is situated, we're situated at that key spot, intersecting where the Arctic meets Europe and meets the Asia Indo-Pacific region, and we're at the nexus of that. And we're in a location where you can get to all these key defense centers within a 10-hour flight, and you can basically work in one single day. You breach all these different time zones. So when the DSRB was looking for a location, I think Bridget and Peter and Tamara and the minister felt if Prime Minister Carney is going to put Canada name forward as a potential host to bring all these jobs and bring all these potential location, Vancouver's an ideal location for that, for all these geopolitical and location
Plus,
reasons.
we have good restaurants.
And it's also one of the best places in the world to live.
Yeah.
And it's relatively safe, and the weather could be better, but we can't have everything.
With spring right around the corner, our sponsor Fortis BC wants to make sure you're ready for yard work. Public safety is the #1 priority for our sponsor Fortis BC, and raising awareness of the importance of safe digging is one of the ways they keep their customers safe and minimize potential service disruptions. That means clicking or calling BC One Call before digging or any other active ground disturbance, even for something as simple as planting shrubs, gardening, or building a fence. BC One Call is a free service that provides location details of utility lines in the area and individuals looking to work in, ultimately reducing the risk of accidental damage. Approximately 90% of damages to Fortis BC's gas lines are preventable when BC One Call is contacted in advance and the required safe digging practices are followed. Residents and contractors can contact BC One Call by visiting their website www.bc1c.ca, that's BC the number 1 c.ca, or calling 1-800-474-6886. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
So it's like specialized understanding of how these loans would work, I guess. I was trying to think about it in local terms, and I thought, well, I know that there was one credit union that specialized in lending to fishermen because it could figure out how to manage the risk, or to a taxi driver. So these are people who really understand procurement and could say, well, your robot idea doesn't work because it's being done elsewhere, so we're not going to loan to you, but somebody else might get a loan.
If I can give you a simple example, Geoff, if you understand defense procurement, quite often these big government departments will give you a contract, but they won't give you a deposit. They won't give you an upfront like payment, or you basically got to fund this entire program out of your own cash flow, and you get paid at the end. That's hard for a lot of companies, and if you go to a regular bank, there's a few banks that understand that defense world, but most of them don't. So the idea was, let's create a specialized bank that focuses on the defense sector, focuses specifically on security, specifically on the resilience of building a supply chain that can be reliable in the event of a long-term conflict, and match together capital pools that want to invest in that kind of thing with companies that need access to that kind of financing, and let's put it in one place and have that specialized in that location, and that's why we think Vancouver is a great location for that.
But I think
does that help?
That's good, but also I think it puts an onus on the provincial government. Again, I'm not making a partisan comment, but to have an industrial strategy that reflects these opportunities and is persistent enough to allow the private sector to pick it up. So I think of, you're sitting in front of a picture of an airplane, but I don't think the public is aware we have significant, as you say, aerospace sector in the province, including maintenance. We
Huge.
have good training programs. We have
Yes.
manufacturing of water bombers, and in the right context, all of that could become a very powerful second level kind of
Yeah.
location for manufacturing and jobs.
You've got Avcor Aviation and Delta that's making parts today that go on the F-35. You've got KF up in the Kelowna. You've got the training programs for pilots. There's a lot already out there in British Columbia that we could build on. And I have to say, Michael, if I can just make a political statement, as somebody who's a kind of a lifelong conservative, it it's gratifying that we have a liberal prime minister who has brought forward the defense industrial strategy, and we're working with an NDP government and minister like Minister Callan and Premier Eby, was very supportive of the DSRB bank
Mm.
concept. You have an NDP provincial government, a liberal federal government committing to defense spending and defense and attracting defense infrastructure and defense finance. And I think that's a good thing for Canada overall, because I think there's a recognition now how important the sector is for the economy and for the future.
Well, Ray, appreciate all the context on today's kind of defense environment, how BC can plug into that. But I did want to go back in the time capsule a little bit
Yeah,
because of your own political background. And I mean, your first touch on defense, I guess, was when you were working in the minister's office in the 1980s with Kim Campbell.
yep.
And obviously, a very interesting time to be involved as a political staffer through free trade and Meech Lake and all those things that were going on at the time. But what are your reflections on being part of the rise of, at that time, the most important female politician in Canadian history? It still is, maybe, you're right, because the only one who ever reached the prime ministership. But what was it like to go through that as being at her elbow throughout that entire process?
It was a great experience. It's funny. I actually grew up as a liberal. My dad hated Diefenbaker, and we were like we were Italian immigrants, and in a liberal community. So we're strong liberals. And one morning I woke up, I'm a big baseball fan, as you know. I woke up to watch a baseball game, and what came on was the 1976 Progressive Leadership Convention with Flora
Yeah,
MacDonald as the person they thought was going to win the leadership that
right.
day. And I guess maybe I came from a matriarchal family, but that concept appealed to me, for the first
Mm.
woman to possibly be prime minister. And it stuck with me. And I watched that whole convention for 13 hours, even though I hadn't really paid much attention to conservative politics. And at the end of it, I came to the realization I must be a conservative. And so when I ultimately did get involved, it stayed in the back of my mind. And then, being from Vancouver and Kim, winning in 1988, and her, when I started getting to know her and the potential, it just fit to me to say she's got the potential to do this, and she aspired to it, and we were able to put together a team to help her achieve it. Unfortunately,
The winds of
the
change
world
were
says,
blowing in your face.
yeah, exactly. It's hard. It's hard. You've been in that situation,
Yeah.
and all Geoff as well. So it just so happens. But I think she would have been a terrific prime minister. She was a great person, very intelligent, doing it for the right reasons, and I'm sure there'll be a female prime minister of Canada someday soon, and I hope it's not too long.
Well, you mentioned it's interesting I haven't heard that story before about how you got the political bug, but
Yeah,
that speaks to a earlier era of these leadership conventions, and you were a big part of the 1983 convention
yeah.
um, that Brian Mulroney rose to power in. Do you have a feeling of nostalgia for those conventions? Do you think they should be reintroduced to our political parties, or do you think their day has passed and the way we're doing it now is the best way?
I think the way we're doing it now is terrible. Just it's basically just the vote stacking, vote stuffing. How many pins can you pick up to put in a ballot? People signing up for 5 minutes and voting, not voting. It's it's so antiseptic.
Mhm.
There's something about electing a delegate from your community, having that delegate go through a process where someone's got to convince them that they're the best candidate. People put a lot of those delegates put a lot of time and attention into educating themselves, and then they all go and collectively make a decision. Especially some of those conventions where there's lots of stuff going on the floor and lots of convincing and argumentation. It was a hell of a lot of fun. It's a fantastic experience. I haven't even gone. I wouldn't even go to the convention today. It's boring by
Just you're going to
comparison.
watch
So
the results, basically. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Even the Republican convention, I've been to a few of those, and everything's preordained. It's all just a TV show, and it's boring compared to, I mean, that '83 leadership convention. I mean, things happen on the floor that changed the
Hmm.
course of Canadian history.
Hmm.
Um, that won't happen today. So I think there's something lost there. Of course, someone's going to argue that it's more democratic this way, more people get to be involved, and so on and so forth. And there's probably good arguments on both sides. But
I
I
argued
know,
that point myself as a young liberal. I
did you?
argued for one member, one vote, and I'm maybe disagreeing with myself now.
Wouldn't be the first time.
What about I mean, you've seen this now from the perspective of someone who works in a sector where Canada, frankly, lagged for a long time and now is hoping to catch up. And you
Yeah.
mentioned sovereignty earlier. When you look at the challenges facing Canada nationally and internationally, do you have fears that you didn't have then when you were working in the center of things in the 80s about Quebec or about Alberta and some of the other dynamics? Are there things that make you uneasy, or are you confident that we'll pull through all this?
I think Canadians ultimately believe in Canada. I mean, obviously, back in 1983, we came pretty close to the edge of what might happen in Quebec. Um, I think you only have to look at. I'm sure you guys all watched the Olympic gold medal game, and yeah, I was in Saudi Arabia at the time watching it um, at some crazy hour, and the I think Canadians inherently are Canadian, and if you grow up in this country, so I have a lot of hope for Canada. In many ways, I think Canada has a lot of potential. Defense is just one of those areas. But if you look at our country, if I think back 30 years, I would have thought that we were so blessed with natural resources, and if that we would have been able to develop our oil and gas business and our mining capabilities and our technology capabilities, that we should be the richest country in the world by far. You look at us in comparison in size to someone like Saudi Arabia, or to what Norway's done with less people and less land and even fewer resources, and they've got a $2 trillion sovereignty fund, or sovereign wealth fund. Um, I look back and I feel like there's a wasted opportunity, but we still have a very well educated population. We're very well respected around the world. We've got some great companies and some great capabilities, and blessed with natural resources like most people don't have. And therefore, spending some money to invest in protecting that and protecting your sovereignty so you can control your own destiny, I think is a really smart move.
Well, on that note, Ray, we'd like to thank you for your time today. I know you're a busy guy, globetrotting around the world,
I'm
but
disappointed. I'm disappointed you invited me on your show and not ask me about DRIPA.
that's gonna be a whole nother show, Ray.
Yeah, because I watched a few of your episodes, like all DRIPA all the time.
Oh boy, I'm dripping out.
We're trying to change it
Yeah,
up a bit.
yeah. But
I hear you.
appreciate your time coming in and lending
No
your
worries.
expertise, and we'll look forward to having you back on the show again sometime.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
When wild salmon return, coastal communities and economies thrive. By transitioning away from Pacific ocean-based salmon farms, we can rebuild salmon runs and restore the health of our waters, reviving ecosystems that coastal communities rely on, bringing back tourism, expanding local business, and generating thousands of good year-round jobs across coastal regions. And we can create new opportunities with future-focused industries like modernized land-based aquaculture that protects wild salmon, strengthens food security, and supports workers and families. That's according to our new sponsor, Wild First. For them, it's essential nation-building work, built in partnership with First Nations, that will unlock long-term economic opportunity and attract global investment to Canada's coastal industries. Let's secure a strong, sustainable coastal economy for generations with the wild salmon economy. Wild First. Let opportunity flow. Visit wildfirst.ca.
Okay, we're back in the strategy suite. Geoff and I are joined by our old friend, Jess Ketchum, leader of the non-NDP Party of British Columbia. Jess, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me, Mike and Geoff.
Yeah, well, I think we should give a little background note to our listeners, Mike, that we asked Jess a number of podcasts ago when he was a guest to define the basis of unity for social credit, and he said, not NDP. And we're now at a new stage in BC politics where it looks like the Conservatives candidates are fighting over a different term, maybe certainly not BC Liberal. That's apparently out.
Jess, could
So
I
I'm
ask you a
just hoping
question?
Jess
though?
can
Well, I
help
want to
us.
ask a question to Jess because this is part
Yeah.
of a conservative purity test. Jess, were you once a member of the BC Liberal Party?
Yes, I was actually an early adapter.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
well, you failed.
Okay.
Jess, were you once a Socrat?
Yes, I was young and old.
Okay,
Mhm.
well, that may have redeemed you. Anyways, that will be our version of the conservative purity test for today, and we'll admit you into the strategy suite on that basis, and let our listeners decide how pure you really are. So, first of all, before we get into it, what time is it? Geoff, do you know what time it is in BC? I don't know what time it is in
Yeah,
BC
it's just the
anymore.
usual time. It's going to change on the weekend. Right now, it's just after lunch.
Well, is it after lunch? Is it an hour before lunch? Is it an hour after lunch? Like
Don't
I mean, I
overcomplicate it.
don't
We
know.
change twice a year. Now we're going to stop changing, Mike. I know
Well, I know, but are we on Yukon time now? Is that what we did?
I
Like,
think
was this
so. Yeah.
the Yukon doing a hostile takeover of BC's time zone and deciding? Like, I'm so confused. What are the farmers going to do? Is this, wasn't this for the farmers? Did the farmers?
Daylight saving time was for the farmers, wasn't it? So that
I
people, it
don't
made
know.
it more logical to get out to the barn.
Well, like in Quesnel in the winter, Jess, it's going to be like it's tuck, like it's going to be dark until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon now because we're not going back to standard time.
Hey, the caribou will always be in a different zone, Mike. Just not a time zone. We're in a different zone entirely.
Disneyland will be in a different time zone half the year. I mean, how are parents? What if parents show up an hour late for early entry at Disneyland because they're confused by the time change? There's going to be hell to pay with the children of British Columbia who are going to Disneyland. So I don't know. You guys don't seem as concerned about this as I am.
Well, Mike, I tell you one thing. A couple of things about the time issue. First of all, it seems that we've given up on the science of what's the best thing for people from a health perspective, and I think that's somewhat concerning that the time zone change may have an impact on people's health, and it could be detrimental. And so we haven't paid attention to that, which I find a bit concerning. But the other thing, which I find fascinating, is that I think that the government, the strategic folks sitting behind and around the premier, decided this was a great distraction, away from the debate about the budget. Now, how silly is that?
People are going to be pretty distracted when
However,
they
here we
don't know
go.
what time the hockey game starts. That's all I'm
Yeah.
going to say.
But I mean, my point, Mike, is that here we are talking about it. We're not talking about the budget. We're talking about the time change. Lots of the media that you you've heard over the last few days, talk shows, usually political type talk shows, are dealing with the time zone issue.
Mhm.
So, from that perspective, the people who
Well,
thought about this as a strategy around the politics, I think it worked. I think they can say, hey, this was a good program.
I think it worked within the context of a news cycle, but it's, my analogy, which Jeff, will see how you feel about this, is Family Day. When the BC Liberals brought in Family Day, there was a lobby to have it on the different weekend than the American holiday, so that it would benefit the ski hills and things like that in BC
That's
from a
right. Yeah.
tourism basis. But the Oregon government changed it to align with other jurisdictions because it's frankly is a pain in the neck to be on a different calendar than say Toronto, right? Where business one week they're in their office on the Monday, and the different week the offices are in the different jurisdiction are different. So I see that as that this is going to be an ongoing irritant. Maybe not the biggest issue everybody has, but it's just going to be a pain in the neck long after the news cycle's passed.
Yeah, well, I don't have any insights into what Premier Eby was thinking or doing, but I know that my dear departed boss, John Horgan, actually cared about this change and thought it was dumb and went through a process which people are critical of now. But and I have to confess, I never cared about it nearly as much as he did.
Mm.
So I can't sit here and give you a really excellent political explanation for why this is a fantastic policy idea, but he did agree that it should be aligned with the other jurisdictions on the Pacific Seaboard. That was part of the rationale, and we won't be. So I don't have a magic bullet to use against Jess's argument that this is pure distraction politics. But I agree with Jess too. It works because it's one of those great water cooler talkers that absolutely everybody has an opinion on. And, I haven't heard the term circadian rhythms for quite a while, but I heard it on the news a couple of times yesterday. Apparently mine are going to be just in the ditch after this next change. So,
Well,
if I don't
what?
make it on the podcast on time, Mike, just blame it on
Oh boy, yeah.
my advanced years and my screwed up circadian rhythms.
So half the year, like we do a lot of work with Eastern time zone. So half the year, I don't know whether they're going to be 4 hours or 2 hours.
I have every confidence you'll work it out.
I don't know that I will.
No, you're successful in global
Um,
markets, Mike. I think you'll be fine.
well, what are they trying to distract us from? Let's ask about that. Well, one of them could be the
How long have you
budget.
got?
Yeah, how long have we got? We got a lot. We got a lot of time to power through the distraction and get to the heart of the issues here. There's the budget. Now, with the budget, which is, hasn't exactly been celebrated with five-star reviews. But along comes Alberta, hold my beer, and $9.4 billion deficit. Pretty big, getting pretty close to BC. Um, did the BC government just have bad timing? Maybe our deficit wouldn't seem so bad if Alberta had gone first, for instance.
I think the problem is the BC government has not laid out a path to balance or guardrails or some other long-term rationale. Whereas the Alberta government has a history of these wild mood swings because of oil prices. So, under Jason Kenney, there was a terrible deficit. They come and go, and they refuse to consider certain taxation as common in every other province. And sadly, because of the Iran war, their forecasts for oil prices may turn out to be more on the money than we thought, and it'll produce a much smaller budget than they're forecasting, which BC can't look forward to. But I saw a lot of criticism by responsible forecasters that the Alberta budget was too optimistic about how high the oil price would get, and that was creating a lower deficit than would otherwise be the case. But with the war breaking out, it may be that those forecasts are even conservative, and Danielle Smith will find herself in a better position.
Yeah, Mike, I have difficulty understanding why I should care about Alberta's deficit when we're talking about our fiscal management in BC.
Mhm.
I think that that's kind of like saying my neighbors aren't good managers of their finances, and that somehow is my business. I think that first we need to talk about our trends when it comes to fiscal management, Geoff is right. There's no guardrails in place. There's no even future plan for getting back to balance. We're bound to be in for another adjustment in our
Credit
tax
rating. Yeah.
credit rating, and that's going to have a big impact. And so I worry that we're not having much of a debate so far publicly in BC, and the work that you guys are doing will help with that, shining a light on some of these issues. But I think British Columbians really need to get back to paying attention to how is the government managing the finances, because boy, I'll tell you, just those interest payments alone are eating
Killer.
up an awful lot of resources that could go to do some really good works.
I haven't seen a ton of cost-saving measures brought up in question period yet. I I see most of, as is usually the case with oppositions, they're, why didn't you spend money on this? You know, so ultimately down the road, or perhaps even in the context of the leadership race, we'll see some more concrete ideas as to what the Conservatives would do about this mess that BC is in. But so far, what I'm seeing in question period is things like, well, the people with disabilities didn't get enough money, or you sacked the merit commissioner, and things like that. It's like, well, okay, easy, easy hits off, taking them off the shelf and running with. But at some point, even oppositions have to reckon with, their platform for the next election. So,
Well, I think there were two hard bumps after the budget came down. I mean, it's been such a strange political period because of the tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, which led to the cancellation of the throne speech. And I said this earlier: those of us who work on throne speeches cherish them, and
you must
everybody
have
else
really been looking
ignores them.
forward for that throne speech, Geoff.
Well, I was, because I think it forces governments to at least put down an elevator pitch about what they think they're going to be doing, and we haven't heard that elevator pitch in this case. But I think the focus then quickly shifted over to things like the merit commissioner, and also now the anxiety over DRIPA is back because of a deal signed by the federal government with the Musqueam, which, as I read it, was mostly related to fisheries matters and had nothing to do with anybody's house, but included a map that the Musqueam had produced that showed their claim area that covers a huge swath of the Lower Mainland, including areas that are claimed by about 10 other First Nations. So that's been a firestorm because the premier said first he didn't know anything about it, and then it turned out he was at the signing ceremony. So that's been a problem for him. Not a great start. But
Well,
on the
let's get
budget
into
side,
that. Let's get into that one. Yeah, right
well,
off
just
the
let me
bat.
stop on the budget though briefly, because I was
Okay.
surprised by two things. One was, and I should have said them up front. One was that there's now a ripple of frustration among a lot of groups that are ready to go, like the Hogan's Alley Society in Vancouver, which has got all the permits even apparently on an affordable housing project. The affordable housing fund was capped and cut back. And so there was a wave of people frustrated about that. There's a wave of people frustrated about the fact that they're no longer in the capital plan to get their long-term care home. And then there was the consultants, the architects, but especially accounting firms and so on, who, much bigger deal than I realized, furious at having provincial sales tax added into their billing. So when you said it was getting less than a standing ovation, that was kind of an understatement. There was a widespread outcry of pain for a few days afterwards.
Well,
Anyway, go ahead on the other one.
well,
Sorry,
the
I just wanted
changes
to
to,
get those points.
the changes to the PST will add at least $500 million a year in revenue. And one of the reasons why, I think they've got their back to the wall is that, we often forget that they cut the carbon tax. They dropped the carbon tax, and that's a $2 to $2.5 billion hole in the budget that's driving up the deficit. And they didn't get rid of the tax cuts that went with the carbon tax. And you could argue even that the income tax hike that they made is a consequence of the removing the carbon tax. So,
Well, and gas prices are going to go up 5 cents this week, I will forecast, even though the gas in the pipeline was refined and moved around long before the Iran war. So this was, there've been a few issues like that where no one could step outside the house and say, I'm kind of okay with the carbon tax. It just was dead on arrival, so it had to go. But you're right, there wasn't a strategic response to that political reality.
and they had their first vote on the budget in the legislature, and the vote was
Tied.
tied. Speaker broke the tie. So, lest there be any doubt, where the Greens are voting on the budget and the 5 independent MLAs, they all joined with the Conservatives. So all it took was one NDP MLA to basically cause an election, which I don't expect to happen over the budget. But apparently there'll be 3 more confidence votes on the budget before it's all wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
So,
At
so
least
it's, yeah,
two.
it's a little tight,
It's
in there.
tenuous. And
Yeah.
and what about DREPA amendments? Yeah, we haven't had the last shoe drop on that front either, because as I think said earlier, it's a really tough call to say to someone who comes from an Indigenous community, and 3 of the NDP MLAs do, that they should, stick with the caucus and vote for DREPA amendments that the overwhelming amount of First Nations opinion is opposed to.
Well, before we get into the First Nation stuff, I just want to bring up one thing that's maybe a bit of a niche issue in a way. But there was a little controversy in the House last week over a private member's bill, and it was the Human Rights Code Repeal Act, brought forward by independent MLA Tara Armstrong. And that was defeated on first reading by a vote of 50 to 37. Now, we just heard that in the budget vote was 47-46. So how'd they get to 50? Well, it was Sturco, the Greens, and Amelia Boltby who opposed that bill at first reading. Now, the 37 Conservatives voted to pass it at first reading, along with one BC, the one BC person, because that's what you do at first reading. You approve bills at first reading so that they can be debated, right? So it was defeated at first reading. So I thought we have a clipping of the week on this. It's basically a tweet, actually, from Rob Shaw, where he says, when parties vote down first reading, it robs the BC legislature of its core function, which is any elected MLA should be able to put a bill on the floor of the House for the public to see and judge. If the bill is repugnant, judge the MLA, but the system of blocking first reading is undemocratic. I agree with Rob on that. I think it's bad practice to defeat bills at first reading most of the time. I know that during the confidence debate in 2017, Geoff, the NDP voted down first reading of a number of wonderful pieces of legislation the Christy Clark government was bringing in. But I'll give you a mulligan on that one because it was kind of a weird week at the legislature in June of 2017. But generally, if we start going down the path of, well, we're going to define this legislation as quote unquote something, and it doesn't even deserve to be debated, it's a bit of a slippery slope, in my opinion.
I don't think so. But Jess, what do you think?
Well, I happen to agree with Mike. I think that providing the opportunity to debate a piece of legislation is the right way to go. And then rather than having a couple of MLAs make that decision, I think that providing the opportunity for debate, it's like providing the opportunity for a conversation. And we already have enough problems with transparency in dealing with government these days. The more we can have a public debate over these issues, the better.
Well, I thought a private member's bill was brought forward and passed in the last session. The government hasn't shown a determination to shut down every single bill that comes from
I'm not saying
individual
that.
members. No, well, okay, so there is democracy alive and well. I think if I was an MLA and someone brought forward a bill that was the Male Superiority Act for BC, I wouldn't vote for it. I didn't get into politics to even make a symbolic statement on that behalf. I don't want to have that conversation. Likewise, with repeal of the Human Rights Code, I think that's very offensive legislation. I don't know how an MLA could say, yeah, no, I think there's some important issues to debate here about repeal of the Human Rights Code. I don't.
Well, on this we'll disagree. I don't think
you're not in the government either.
I don't think repealing an act of the legislature is out of bounds. I mean, it's an act of the legislature, can be repealed. Why can't it be? Have the debate.
No, it could be. And if a government came in having been elected saying they were going to repeal the human rights, that's a different question. If one person gets to put up their hand and say, I think I'm going to repeal something that is close to the hearts of, I would say, the vast majority of British Columbians, then the legislature has every right to say, well, you know what, that's not what we're going to talk about today. If you want to win an election as a government party, then you can bring it forward then. But the private members' bills are not to reshape society in such fundamental ways as changing the Human Rights Code.
Well, I think the danger here is that the stakes grow higher to oppose bills on first reading, and that if you support a bill that you may not agree with at first reading, you'll be attacked for looking like you support it because people won't understand the difference between first and second reading, and we're just gonna, I think it's not helpful to responsible debate in the legislature. That is my concern. It's like we have these customs.
Okay, well, let's check in
99.9% of the
6 months
time.
and see how far down the slope we slid. I don't think we'll be anywhere.
Oh boy,
near
Jeff, I don't know.
much bigger problems, bigger fish to fry than this, Mike. Come on.
The socialist hordes are at the door.
You're really, you got the jitters today. You're worried about the time changes.
Yeah.
Taking votes is a problem. Come on.
I might be the thin line protecting democracy
You're the
here,
canary
Jeff.
in the coal mine.
You've
Yeah,
you've carried off into the
if we still have any coal mines, I
deep
think we've
dark
got a few.
woods by yourself.
It's a good thing I'm here.
Good thing you're here, Jeff. Thank you, Jess.
Jeff.
Okay, can't keep you two guys apart here. Tell them apart. So let's get into the First Nation stuff. So we've already kind of tipped our toes into it, but it was big news this week that there's out of the blue, at least to most people, federal government and the Musqueam did an agreement. Now, the federal government and the provincial government are doing agreements all the time with First Nations. So let's put that in perspective. But this one landing at this moment in time, and I think the graphic or the visual that was used with the big map, it set off, especially on the conservative side of things, alarm bells. But it's coming hot on the heels of Cowchin, Drippa, all that commentary. So I actually put the Musqueam in a pretty tough spot. Chief Wayne Sparrow said, Musqueam is not coming for anyone's private property. Our approach to traditional unceded territory is one of partnership and relationship with our neighbors. We are not trying to take away our neighbors' private property. So he wanted to make that clear. Whereas Jock Finlayson, former or well-known economist and commentator, he says the absence of information and the secretive nature of the discussions led to the Musqueam agreements can only stoke public anxiety, adding to the worries and uncertainty that now accompany most discussions of property rights, land ownership, and land use. That's the other side of that's the pendulum swinging in that direction of the debate. Now then, to cap it off, and then we'll get into it here. While he attended the signing ceremony, Premier Eby didn't appear to know about it and has kind of got caught up in the timeline and chronology of what he knew or what should he have known. And the federal government has said, well, we sent this agreement to the province weeks ago. A bit of a schmozzle. Vaughn Palmer's roasted him over it. It's a bit of a schmozzle for the BC government about where they fit into all this and what is it this agreement about anyway. So, Geoff, your take.
Well, the main critic, and he's got sterling credentials, is Tom Isaac, a lawyer who was a treaty negotiator for the provincial government and represents many, many people in the corporate sector who deal successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully with First Nations. So I have a lot of time for Tom Isaac, but he, if you read carefully what he says, and he's very good at expressing a lot of anxiety while saying cautionary notes at the same time, apparently this will have an impact that we can't have any confidence that this doesn't have an impact on private property unless we spend some more time looking into it. And today, a Saskatchewan law professor named Dwight Newman also wrote about it. I like Newman because he's outside BC and he's an expert in the field. So when he speaks about it, he's not as caught up in our political crosswinds. He says, yeah, there's something that we need to look at here. So to me, that there's probably much less here than meets the eye in the agreement. The problem is the Premier's management of the issue has caught him in a really awkward spot because he several times said he had no idea about it, but actually was at the signing ceremony. So you can see how that might happen if you've been a political staffer, but it's an embarrassment to the Premier, especially given how hot the issue is right now. So it reignited it when the fires have been sort of banked a bit for a while, I think.
What do you think, Jess?
Well, I find this really troubling. I think there are two issues here. The least important to me is the problem the Premier seems to be having with responding to what he knew when. The bigger problem for me is the agreement itself and the lack of transparency with the public around these issues. I fear, as someone who believes that we should be working towards reconciliation, and we have to have a discussion sometime as to what that really looks like. But I believe that we require reconciliation, and there's the lack of information on this agreement has Wayne Sparrow, Chief Wayne Sparrow, out explaining from his perspective that we're not coming after your house. The government of Canada, who struck the agreement, are absent from providing further information, and it's creating a level of fear among property owners, private property owners in particular, in BC, as to what's coming down the road. And if you actually read the agreement, and if you listen to the Tom Isaacs and Robin Youngers of the world and other people who are very knowledgeable about these issues, maybe this particular agreement shouldn't be as worrisome as some would make it. What that means is that we don't have enough information to really determine whether there's a significant concern or not. However, when the federal government comes out with an agreement and talks about recognizing the rights of Indigenous peoples to the land, now we have a problem not only with private property owners, we have a problem with other First Nations who, lands or traditional territories overlap like crazy. We have Wayne Sparrow, I believe he was talking about, we're only talking about federal lands. Well, what does that really entail? I mean, I'm not familiar enough with the YVR land arrangements around ownership, but at one point they were owned by the federal government. I don't know if they still are. What about the Port of Vancouver, largest port on the West Coast? I mean, the lack of good information to fuel a proper discussion is really lacking. I blame that on both the federal and provincial governments, but in this one, primarily the federal government.
Well, Musqueam do have agreements already with YVR and the Port of Vancouver, which provides, some stability and certainty on those fronts. But they're kind of the meat and the sandwich here of a hot political debate. And I think the federal government, as it usually does, is not really aware of what the politics are happening here in BC right now, and kind of wandered into this situation without a lot of forethought, is my impression of it. But that's just, there's going to be a lot more of these. We can't just stop all negotiations with all First Nations in BC and expect, just wait for us to sort out our political problem here, and then we'll get back to you in 2 years from now. No, there's going to be more agreements announced, and we're just going to figure out, government's going to have to figure out a better way to deal with that.
I agree with Jess, and there's a historical context here, which is that because people know that private property has got to be left alone, the possibility of treaty settlements in heavily urbanized areas like Vancouver is low to nil. And so what has happened, going back to Lord and Campbell and federal administrations before, is that we looked for ways to transfer value-producing lands that are in Crown control to First Nations. So we have MST, a massive development firm with $1 billion in assets, which is now owns the old post office building and a number of other sites, the Jericho lands and so on. So this was all done right out in the open, and we now see the towers in Vancouver rising on the Squamish territory, which was their reserve, actually, not a Crown land handover like the others. And I think there's really a huge obligation on the part of the federal government, because it is the senior level of government here, to be way more engaged. This was a fisheries deal, so they wouldn't have thought too much about the province on this because that's their exclusive territory. But the way they laid it out is a very anxiety producing for upstream Fraser River First Nations, who will want to know, I think, how the Musqueam are going to make decisions and over what when it comes to sockeye runs back to the entire Fraser system. So, these are
Yeah.
complicated matters. And of course, we've all heard the phrase race-based fisheries, which drove a ton of anxiety about this question in the past. So it was very ham-fisted of the federal government. But the premier's been caught, in a bad state of affairs here. I'm not quite sure how he can turn that around, but he had a bad week on this one.
But
Okay.
the other issue that I have a problem with, every time that I hear in the Indigenous community in particular, but also representatives in government saying that this doesn't apply to private property. I get concerned that I'm not being told that in these agreements that it doesn't apply. I'm listening to people talk about their opinions about these agreements rather than having it stated in the agreement itself. Because I have this sense that lots of people in the Indigenous community say, we're not coming after your house, but we do want the government to compensate us for the land that it's sitting on. And that brings in a whole different range of questions.
Okay, more to come on that one. We'll go from fish to birds here. Jas Johal reported on Twitter the other day that Kevin Falcon's making calls to support his sister-in-law, Caroline Elliott. Said Minister Farnworth, of course he is, but no matter if it's Elliott, Millibar, Black, or someone else, this race is a BC Liberal rebranding exercise. Cowbirds are afoot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a great opportunity for us to introduce our new segment, Birding with Geoff.
Cowbirds.
Geoff,
You can-
what is
you
a
can
cowbird?
usually see a
What is a
cowbird.
cowbird, Geoff?
A cowbird is about a robin-sized bird, which you can often see. The only time I've seen them is down at Iona Spit. And I wouldn't claim any great credentials as a birder. I get to hang around with some good birders. But the thing about a cowbird is that they have disregarded completely the solidarity among birds that you would expect to happen, and they move mercilessly in on other birds' nests and lay their eggs there, and then just bog off and allow the other family to take care of their eggs and everything else. So how cowbird chicks learn how to be miserable cowbirds when they grow up, I don't know. It's a bit of an odd metaphor. Not quite sure
Yeah, I'm trying to
how.
make I think there's a metaphor there
But
somewhere,
let's just name check Mike Farnworth's credentials. He is an avid birder, one of the top birders who he walks around Colony Farm and the park out there all the time and has a huge list of birds that he's seen. So I wouldn't quarrel with him because he's an expert in this field, much more so than I am. But I'm not quite sure how the political metaphor works here in terms of Kevin Falcon and Caroline Elliott. Not quite sure.
well, Minister Farnworth is suggesting that a BC Liberal rebranding exercise is a bad idea, but Jess, maybe it's a good idea. What do you think?
Well, I'll go with Mike Farnworth on that one. Yeah. Well,
What are you hearing on the leadership race?
Well, it's early days. I mean, we've had a couple of drop off. We're up to 11. We're down to 9 apparently, and the deadline is over for nominations. So
The first deadline, yeah.
Yeah,
They
so
still
we're
have
at least
they still
9.
have to put money in over time, right?
Yeah, and so each of those times we may have others consider dropping off. I think that from my perspective, it's starting to show that the Ian Blacks, Caroline Elliott's, Peter Milburn, they're sort of the front runners at this point. Maybe Yuri Fulmer is a bit of an unknown dark horse in the race at this point. I understand he's working hard and moving around a lot, but if I had to point out to who's leading the race at the moment, I'd have to say it's Black, Elliott, and Milburn.
What about
Do you
Save on
take-
Daryl?
Yeah.
Look, I mean, Daryl, you can't discount Daryl I know Daryl. He was on the Save Our Streets oversight committee, so I got to deal with Daryl a lot. I like Daryl, smart guy. Yes, people know him from his ads, but I know him as a very considerate, smart, business-oriented individual who has BC. Um, um, the best for BC is his goal, but he lacks in political experience, and I don't know enough about the machinery around him to really measure how much of an opportunity he has for growth. As you guys know, that's so important, especially when you're into a membership drive situation, as this race certainly is.
What do you think about caucus support? Is that important? I mean, we saw Mike was, I think, working on Christy Clark's campaign, and she had notably thin caucus support, so she and was successful. So we see Peter Millibar with significant caucus support, and I think Ian Black has the support of Teresa Watt at least. Is that going to be a big deal? And is Carolyn Elliott struggling for that reason?
I don't know that she's struggling, by the way. I haven't seen that. Excuse me, but I think that I go by Christy's experience as well, that she didn't have that support and she was very successful. And when I look at Peter Milburn's support, correct me if I'm wrong, but none of it's from the Lower Mainland. None of it's from
his caucus support so far. Rumor has it there's more coming.
We can't base it on rumors, though, Mike.
We can't. That's all we do. That's all we do on this podcast is talk about rumors.
No.
Well, he did have the coveted endorsement from a BC Conservative boy band last week. Kyle, Scott, Ward, and the Dews supported him. Right. But they're all, to your point, they're all interior MLAs. So yeah, he'll want to show more. But I mean, I think that's Millibar's card to play here is that if he gets by far the most caucus endorsements, that's a feather in his cap. I kind of feel like Peter Millibar and Ian Black are going to be fighting a primary as to who is seen as the most viable contender to Caroline, because they're a similar profile. They're both around the same age. They're both, more of your conventional male politician. They probably both dispute that description, but I'm going to throw it out there. And Caroline's very different.
Yeah.
And
but
so
Millibar and Black are both former Liberal MLAs. So you talked about the purity test, and then you have their support, primarily Millibar's support coming from the interior and central BC, which is important to me. My roots, I need that interior north component, and those guys represent that well. But I just don't think that having the endorsement of existing MLAs, especially without some key people from the area where most of the votes are, really counts.
I wonder, how Carolyn Elliott redefines herself as someone who, at least from my point of view, was unknown until she wound up playing more of a role in the transfer from UCP to the Conservative. She was a go-between at that stage. That's the first time she came into public, public light.
Well, she was going to run for BC. She was a nominated candidate for the BC.
Yeah, but she's never run for anything. Sorry. I mean, I think that's important. And her opponents have. And she's only really communicated a concern on a single issue, although she bleeds it over. So she's very, very concerned, and that's her background and training, of course, is Indigenous rights and title and so forth. But also drifted over into anxiety about SOGI, gender orientation training in the schools and so on. But I only have heard that. I'll be interested to hear when she starts to speak about some other questions in front of the province. Because, Ian Black was head of the Board of Trade. Peter Millibar has been elected multiple times, never been defeated. So to stand in that crowd, she's going to have to make some important statements pretty soon. And I think she needs to show some strength somehow in the party organization.
I think that you'll likely see that, Geoff. I'm conflicted here with both Ian and Caroline are friends of mine. And I've spent quite a bit of time talking to both long before this leadership started. And Caroline just recently received her PhD. She's Dr. Caroline Elliott, and in Indigenous governance, which with this issue being so front and center now in British Columbia, it could be the defining issue in the next election. It could be the defining factor in this leadership race. If that's the case, there is nobody that is better to deal with that than Caroline Elliott. No one more knowledgeable. So, I think it's going to be seeing whether or not she can come out and talk about those other issues like the economy and like healthcare. And I believe that she can, but we have to see that from her for sure.
Well, with all due respect to Caroline, it's about more than what you know, right? It's about how you lead. It's how you deal in a crisis. And you have a First Nations blockade. How are you going to deal with that, for instance? Like, I think that's going to be Peter and Ian's job they're probably going to highlight this lack of experience from their perspective and say, well, we have more experience. We're a more trusted pair of hands. Caroline's going to your point, show that I've got this expertise, but I'm also younger. I'm, at a better age to take this on or whatever, right? So it just has to play out. But before we move off of the topic, there are candidates coming in behind this top three that we're anointing here. Carrie Lynn Finley held an event in the past week that couldn't exactly count all the bodies in the video, but it was definitely several hundred at least out in Surrey. Yuri Fomer, as you noted, is out there campaigning hard, and and Harman Bangu, he has his own political operation happening. He has ties to Aaron Gunn. He's got a base out in the Fraser Valley. I think he's from Delta, but he's representing Langley Abbotsford. Keeping an eye on those guys too, because one of them could make a move or at least be very influential in where those second choice votes go down the road. I know I'm forgetting a couple candidates that there's the guy from Rossland, Warren Ham, and who else am I missing? Anyways, there's a couple more. Who was that?
Yeah.
Oh, Bruce Banman.
Yeah.
Bruce Banman, that's right. And there's still one.
Well,
if we can't remember who you are, then Save on Darrell.
Yeah. But my perception as someone watching the Not NDP organization over the years was that there was an understanding. Maybe you guys know more about it than I. Well, you certainly know more than I do. But there was a federal Liberal leadership in the form of whether it was Gordon Campbell or Christy Clark or even Andrew Wilkinson. They had proximity to the federal Liberals, whether or not they were deep partisans for that. And Conservatives had to be sort of second rank. And maybe restively so, unhappily so sometimes. So the challenge was to keep that sort of centrist project happening under the leadership of people who were more.
I would dispute that characterization that the Conservatives were second rank. I mean, I think when it was its most successful as a coalition is that it wasn't an issue. Everyone.
I think that's because everybody. I think Jess is talking. Everybody knew the coalition was critical, and so they took proactive steps to protect it. Is that going to happen in this race? Are these people who are now vying over who's the most conservative ready to say, I need to make sure I have someone with federal Liberal connections in my camp because that's how I'm going to be able to win the election? And I haven't seen that starting to happen yet. On the contrary, I see purity tests for conservatism.
I agree with that totally, Geoff. And as long as the conservative wing of the Conservative Party insists on this purity test, they're in the opposition. That's it, period, full stop. I go back to, not the NDP party in BC. There has to be that unity, and they can argue among themselves once they're government. But if they want to become government and have a taste of what governing is really like, they have to accommodate a wider range of views. And sure, I mean, you have a group of relatively young, I won't say inexperienced, because they're very experienced at the politics of playing politics. But when it comes to getting elected in this province, you have to go where the votes are. And the votes really are not on the fringes, either to the right or the left. I mean, if anything, the NDP has an advantage there, and always has had, where they have a solid core support.
Mm-hmm.
But on the center right, that's not the case. You have to build that.
Well, the good news, Jess, is that there's no purity test to get into the minibar.
Thank goodness.
Do you have a shot or a raise a glass this week for us?
Can I do both?
Yeah.
If I can do both, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So I have a toast. I have a toast to Jatinder Badian, is it?
Bad one, yeah. Chief
Bad.
Coroner, yeah.
Chief Coroner, taking on the job in Tumbler Ridge of doing the inquest. I think that's really, really important, so necessary. And, it's in sitting back and watching this tragedy, I don't know how often at news time, either myself or my wife say it's so good to be a Canadian when you watch all the horror show that goes on in the U.S. when it relates to mental illness and guns. And Tumbler Ridge reminds me that we can't allow ourselves to go out down that slippery road of getting to be anything more like the United States on that front. And so it's an inquest that will help us really understand what's missing. How do we make sure that it doesn't happen again? So my toast is certainly to him and for the work that he's about to do. My shot is to the. I'm going upstairs. My shot has to be to the Prime Minister and the Premier of British Columbia for allowing this debate over this land agreement or this agreement with the Musqueam to get out of hand. I think it does such a disservice to all of us as British Columbians, but especially I think to the Indigenous community because reconciliation depends on how the public of BC feels about whether or not they're ready to reconcile. And as long as they're in fear around what's happening on private property, that reconciliation will never take place.
Okay. Geoff?
Here. Do you want me to raise a glass?
You do whatever you want.
I'm going to raise a glass. I'm going to raise to Bill Thielman, who doesn't require any encouragement, but
No,
long-time pundit and so on. But it's with regard to a recent intervention he made in the NDP federal leadership race, which has 3 BC candidates in it. Tenille Johnson from Campbell River, Indigenous woman, and Avi Lewis, of course, who's now based in Vancouver, and Rob Ashton, who's head of the Longshoremen's Union. Bill took a big run at Avi Lewis, and one of the distinctive things about this NDP leadership race is that it hasn't involved any debate. They mostly tend to agree on everything and certainly never take a run at each other. In fact, have even stepped aside to help each other get over various hurdles to stay in the race and that kind of thing. So it's a very collegial affair. But Bill, as he
Isn't
often
there a guy
does,
in the race who wears a straw hat or something?
yeah, that's a guy from Prince Edward County back east. He's just there to. Never mind. I won't say anything negative about him. But Bill has gone after Avi Lewis with a 5-point set of questions, which are very pointed and triggered a huge outcry on Facebook. And I would suggest if anybody's interested in that to go and take a look at it. But one of the points that he raised is that Avi's only contributed to the NDP 5 times in his life and twice to his own campaign. Maybe considered a low blow, but a lot of New Democrats are interested in that. Just to be fair here, if I can be, Avi Lewis got a huge endorsement last week from Ray Guardia, who is one of the top a very select group of people who are top strategists for the NDP in Quebec. So having Guardia's endorsement is a significant establishment achievement for Lewis, notwithstanding the attacks he's faced from Bill Tillman. But good for you, Bill. I think we need to have some more of these issues ventilated. So I'm raising a glass to Bill.
Good one.
Bill ventilates on a regular basis.
He's not a stranger to a glass either.
Well, I'm going to take a shot at this daylight saving decision.
I'm shocked.
After my theatrics earlier, I do not like BC going alone. We should be figuring it out with with our neighbors to the south. We should be aligned with California, Washington, Oregon. Having said that, I will raise a glass to Dean Crawford, King's Counsel, a proud resident of Creston, BC, who reminds me on Facebook that Creston actually stays mountain time all year long. And says Dean, he's not really aware of any law or regulation. They just do it. And all that to say, it can be in any time zone that you want. Just observe your local preferences. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe we just all decide to be in our own time zone. So there you go. But thank you, Dean, for reminding us about the great people of Creston, BC.
Well, the great thing about the podcast, Mike, is you can decide on your own when you want to download it. So you're not stuck in any government straitjacket.
You can listen to us anytime you want.
That's right.
Well, thanks to Ray Castelli and to you, Jess.
Yeah, thank you, Jess.
For visiting Hotel Pacifico this week. Thanks to our sponsors for allowing us to bring this episode to you for free. See you next week. Cowbirds, BC, you can never leave.